welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 178th episode, our guest is Richard Kreitner. Richard Kreitner is a contributing writer to The Nation magazine and the author of Booked, a traveler's guide to literary locations around the world. A graduate of McGill University, he has also written for Slate, Salon, The Baffler, Raritan, The Forward, and The Boston Globe. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife and 2 children. And now on to the show. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, sure. Happy to do it. Spent all day with 2 babies, so I hope my brain's not too fried.
I got you beat because I got three babies, and we went on our first outing as a family, which was more than like 30 minutes away from our house today with 5-month-old, 5-month-old, 3-year-old, 6-year-old. So.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
What day was the 5-month-old born? Because ours is 5 or 6 months.
April 27th.
All right, we got March 25th, right in the peak of the shit.
I delivered her in our bathtub by accident.
Okay. Whoa.
There was a whole episode about that with my wife a couple episodes back, but.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Well, how's the outing?
I feel your pain. So.
How's the outing today?
Oh, it was great. We went to a state park. We walked around on an easy trail. We saw some owls. It was cool.
Nice. Great.
Fun. So.
Awesome. You're in Indiana, right?
Yeah. Where are you at?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
No kidding. Okay, so a little bit different.
Yeah.
Awesome. How's Brooklyn, New York these days?
It's good. It's certainly better than it was at that time. It's pretty good. Most people are, behaving pretty well with the masks and stuff. As I say, we weren't really doing too much anyway. We weren't going to bars and restaurants. So it's fine. Yeah, that's it.
But it used to be the COVID hotspot, and now you guys are doing relatively well.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's pretty relaxed, certainly compared to what it was in the spring. And I don't know. I mean, some people think that that's because everybody had it, and the, the tests aren't picking that up for some reason. I'm not sure because people are behaving with the masks and social distancing, but not everybody, and not all too much.
No, definitely not everybody in Indiana.
I'm sure not. Yeah, I mean, from what I've heard, you're a freak if you're wearing a mask. Is that about right?
So I'm a newspaper editor during my day job, and I often cover local government meetings, and I am frequently the only person wearing a mask.
Wow.
Or social distancing for that matter. So it's all everything you'd expect it to be. That's neither here nor there. Or is it? Or is this part of your book too?
Yeah, good question.
Good deal. So I guess we didn't even get around to just go ahead and introduce yourself for people who don't know who you are.
Oh, we're recording already. Okay, I didn't realize.
Oh, yeah, we just get it rolling.
That's cool. So my name is Richard Kreitner. I'm a contributing writer for The Nation magazine, and I just published a book in August, a history of the idea of breaking up the union, called Break It Up. And I've been working on that for about 5 years, more or less, kind of full speed for about three and a half years. I've got 2 kids, as we were saying, wife's a teacher. What else? What are you looking for? Personal, political?
Whatever, man. Go everywhere.
I grew up in New Jersey, and I went to school at McGill University in Montreal, where I studied philosophy. And my joke is that if I had studied history, I'd probably be writing a book about philosophy. I didn't care too much for school. This is my second book, though it started as my first one. I published one book. I started writing one after I started writing this, just kind of at night, and published it a year and a half ago, called Booked, which is about places in literature that you can visit in real life. Kind of a side project kind of thing.
Cool.
But this topic really grabbed me when I first thought of it, late 2014. I just got the thought in my head. The Democrats had lost the Senate, and Obama was governing through executive orders, which I thought were of, dubious constitutional value and strategic political value, because it seemed like a Republican president could rescind them as easily as Obama, tendered them, and that ended up being the case. It just occurred to me maybe the federal government is the problem, maybe the union is the problem, and if we broke it up or broke it down into smaller pieces, maybe we, meeting, I guess, the left or something, but people who want universal health care, people who want to do something about climate change, would be able to get more done and have a country that, is more to my liking. And then I just, that was a scary thought, so I kind of avoided answering it and instead looked at who else in history had this thought. Because obviously everybody knows about the Confederacy, but that wasn't an especially appealing, antecedent. So I wanted to see if there were any people who supported it for noble reasons, and it turned out that there were. So I decided to just tell the whole story of everybody who had the idea, all the movements who tried to make it happen, and just generally a history of the fragility of the Union.
Yeah, you said like 10 things I want to talk about separately for sure. But let's go back a little bit. Your wife's a teacher?
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
How's she doing right now with everything, being a teacher?
Pretty stressed. I mean, here in New York.
Yeah, no kidding.
I
went to school to be a teacher, and I'm no longer a teacher.
Yeah.
If I hadn't already turned into into a journalist, I probably would have picked another career by now anyway. Because from everything I've heard, it's people are stressed beyond belief. Like there's no certainty about anything.
Well, even in normal times, they're undervalued and considered dispensable. Mm-hmm. And then this comes along, and that's just tripled or something. Like in the spring, New York was really slow in shutting the schools down because of various kind of misguided policy or reasons. But teachers died, and they were hiding the fact that there were cases. And it seems like they're kind of making the same decision in reverse now about reopening. So it's kind of a scary time. For us, and like I said, we've got babies, so we've got childcare difficulties, and you don't want to expose the grandmothers who might be helpful, but so yeah, not too great, but she's strong and absolutely heroic, and we're doing all right.
Well, yeah, props to all the teachers out there for sure. Absolutely, 100%. Always were essential workers. Deserve to be supported every way more, and now I hope everyone realizes that because my wife and I are also in a unique position because we always planned to homeschool our kids, but now it's like, well, it's never been a better time to start. So our son just started kindergarten, so he's doing great. Today, by the way, counted as a school day, state of Indiana. I hope you know we're counting this one. We went to a state park, we looked at owls, we talked about plants. It was legit. But yeah, it's super hard to be a teacher now, always. I mean, I know, believe me. Yeah. But anyway, so your book, wow. Great topic, very pertinent. I'm not done reading it. I'm about halfway through, so no spoiler alerts. I'm kidding. It's history. You can just say whatever it is.
There was a civil war.
Oh no, I haven't gotten there yet. Yeah. You're kidding me.
Well, I try to maintain this obviously artificial sense of not knowing whether it was coming, or more especially.
I'm not clowning on that tone.
Or more especially when it was coming, because everybody kind of suspected that there was a war coming. It didn't come out of nowhere. It's one of the things I try to show.
Well, it's funny because every time you have one of these quotes that's all about like disunion, I get a little bit anxious, and I'm like, oh man, are these Americans gonna make it or not?
Right. Oh, that's good. That's the effect I was going for.
No, I liked it. It was a good way of telling the story.
And it's obviously the same questions and the same uncertainty that we have today.
100%, absolutely. Has never left us. Ever, really, and is baked into the cake in so many ways. Yep. And we're still living with the consequences of today through majority rule, basically. And I'm absolutely sure you get to that by the end of the book.
Yeah. This is my first interview that I've done since RBG passed from this.
Thank you for getting that. I'm sorry. I should have. 10 minutes in, I'm ashamed of myself. Our rest in power, RBG. Absolutely. I know we're not supposed to say rest in peace, but positive way to live your life. A plus. So yeah, huge loss. Crazy. What do you think's going to happen?
I don't know. I think that they're going to push it through in a lame duck session after Trump loses. Terrible. I hope. I don't know about that, but
hope that's so illegitimate.
And I think it's
all illegitimate. What am I saying?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be on Democrats to decide whether to pack the court or not. And I think they should not comment.
I'm honestly, I think they shouldn't take that off the table at all.
Oh no, I think they should do it. I just don't think that they will.
So disappointing, though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get the argument that it just means that Republicans can do it in reverse, but my feeling is that if you combine it with term limits for Supreme Court justices of staggered 18-year terms, that means that each president elected to a term gets 2 vacancies. Or if you expanded the court first, you might have to change the number of how long the term would be. But the same, each president would have the same number of vacancies. So it would take this kind of uncertainty about deaths and about retirements and the whole political, strategy table, and I think would make our politics much saner, at least. So that'd be my proposal. I don't know what is going to happen, but it's not good. I mean, just we had such a sort of towering pile of crises before this.
I know.
Not what the country needed.
It's so bad. It's one of those things that's so bad. It's like my brain can't even process how bad it is. It's like it doesn't even like it's like a misfire. Like it's like, but it's a sad statement that we have to depend on somebody to live past the age of 87 to like make everything okay for us, because I just feel like that's whatever that system is. It needs to change somehow. I mean, you lived in Canada. Isn't it different there? Like, don't justices have to retire at 75? Didn't I read somewhere?
I actually have no idea. I don't know. I followed
Canadian politics. You just went to college there. It's not like you had to study the
I had no idea how
judiciary or whatever. But...
that'd be worth looking at.
Other democracies around the world do this not for lifetime terms, is what I'm saying.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, it certainly reveals I think a possibly fatal flaw in the system, and undermines the legitimacy of the government. And that was, that supposition that there might be a legitimacy crisis on the horizon is kind of what, kicked off the book idea for me.
It's already here. I mean, it's already here. The Senate, the Electoral College.
Yeah, every branch of government.
It's all stacked against us. Like, I live in a quote unquote red state or whatever, and I'm even saying that. Like, it's just so glaringly obvious. Like, like on the way to the state park, we drove past 1 million cornfields and soybean fields and Trump flags and a few Biden signs, to be fair, but not as many, and not much else. And that we have 2 senators and. New York, California. I lived in California for 3 years. I want to get to that too, because when I was there, people talked about having separatist Northern California, Southern California states. While I was there, that was like openly talked about. Because it didn't feel like, this is a tangent that I'm sure we'll get to later, but like it never felt like I lived in the same state as Southern California. And I even had visited Southern California as a kid because my aunt, my cousins, and my uncle lived there, and my grandfather. So it's like I went to San Diego, I went to Southern California, Arizona, and I was familiar with the area. But when I lived in Northern California for 3 years, in Mendocino County, it was another world. I never went anywhere. I mean, the furthest south I went was like San Jose, and that's it. But like people that I knew as friends and still have as friends there, to openly talked about like we need to like separate and be a southern state, because they were always like bankrupting us and stuff. Like we were producing like the Bay Area and Northern Bay and everything else. We were doing everything for them, and all they were doing was sucking away. And people were like openly talking about this. It was really a thing people talked about still.
Yeah, I mean that's a division that goes back to like the 1850s. People, I have found somebody that I mentioned in the book. Who uses the phrase "a house divided cannot stand," but it's about California, and the year is 1856 or something. 4 years before, or a couple of years before Abraham Lincoln uses the phrase. And that's an old idea. And I think some people feel like that is the way to rectify the problem of the Senate, where California has almost 70 times the number of people as, say, Wyoming, and yet they have the same 2 senators, and that's kind of one reason why people in California support secession from the federal government. But instead, you might break California into, say, 5 states, each of which would have 2 senators, and that would not only, alleviate the problem of minority rule at the federal level, but even things out. within the state itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible. This whole idea of breaking up states as well as the country is an idea that crops up throughout American history, and I relate the story in some eras, and other times I just wasn't able to get to it. But it suggests something to me about this kind of innate fractiousness of American politics that we're always talking about, separatist movements of one form or another, either nationally or on the state level. And that begins, right after the Revolution, when Kentucky's trying to break away from Virginia and Vermont's trying to break away from New York.
Right.
It's a tradition.
Yeah, that blew my mind about was it Vermont that like offered something about they want the King of Prussia. In your book, you talked about that. Like, weren't they like, you can be controlling our country if it was in between the Articles of Confederation and the I think it was Vermont. Vermont didn't become a state, right?
There's two different.
Sorry, I think I'm mixing up two different things in your book.
Yeah, sorry. One is that after the Revolution, Vermont is an independent republic because they break away from New York, but the Congress is not willing to let them in as the 14th state because New York objects and still claims sovereignty over the Green Mountain area. So instead, Ethan Allen, who's in charge of Vermont, appeals to the British, the Americans' enemy, and says that we will join Canada if you don't let us in as a state. And Congress finds this out, and they have to break off negotiations. But there's this kind of subtle threat that if their interests were denied, they would ally with the country's enemy, which a lot of people threatened at the time, not only with Britain but also with Spain, in your neck of the woods, in like Kentucky in the Ohio River Valley. But then secondly, there's a separate story a couple of years later in 1786 when the country is just totally falling apart. Economic depression, foreign enemies are circling, the separatist movements in every part of the country. It's essentially a failure, and this is only 10 years into independence. And the president of the Congress at the time, which was a very weak position, not like the presidency today, but he writes to Frederick the Great's brother in Prussia, and offers him the throne as King of the United States if he wants to come back over and reestablish monarchy in America. But the prince says that Americans are too fractious, too anti-authoritarian, that they would never agree to be ruled from a throne. So he says no to it, and instead they have the Constitutional Convention, of course, and kind of a reboot for the country. But both those stories, I think, show how radically open things were at this time period. It was not like inevitable, as we now think, that after establishing independence, America would kind of rise to greatness and always stay unified. The truth was very far from that. It was constantly divided, and people were always proposing to break it up or otherwise massively change the constitutional system. And then nothing was inevitable about it holding together.
Yeah. I don't mean to skip forward, but this is something I kind of wonder about that I'm sure that you're going to talk about later in the book, but I wonder how much the Louisiana Purchase figures into all this, because, okay, it's easy to fight over land when you have a coast, right? When you have water nearby and a port and beaches and all that good stuff. And the further you get inland, it's like a little more rough and tumble, and it's like hilly area, and it's like, what have we been doing here? Like you said, you have to drag stuff over the mountains unless you like make a deal with Spain, who's closed off the Mississippi River, all that business. It gets dicey,
Yeah, for sure.
Out in the wilderness, and waterways are really the only dependable route of transportation for mass things over a long period of time. But how much of that is like, okay, you got New York, and then but then you also got California later on, but like you got all that part in the middle, and like that large middle part that does kind of hold the two coasts together in a certain way. And if you don't have that large swath of land, like I'm still reading about in the revolutionary times in your book, so it's like there's all these like fractious colonies, and it's like we do business with Britain, and it's like and then it's like you get into Kentucky, and it's like don't get eaten by a bear, or killed by some Native Americans or whatever. It's pretty I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't be the first one to do that anymore.
Yeah, no, it definitely, I mean, all the problems aside that we talk about today about conquest, and empire, it certainly took, chutzpah to forge into this wilderness.
Absolutely.
For sure. Respect on that in that regard. As for the Louisiana Purchase, it plays a pretty big role in the book and in my story. I mean, you mentioned Spain closing the Mississippi River because Spain controlled New Orleans, and in that way they were able to use that as leverage over the frontiersmen in Kentucky and Tennessee, because they weren't able to ship their stuff out to the world without allying with Spain or even declaring allegiance. So they at that point, 1780s, 1790s, those people really did flirt with secessionism. And some actually, were in the pay of Spain in trying to break the ties that bound those frontiersmen to the eastern states that they had left. And that was the reason for the Louisiana Purchase, is that Spain was about to give New Orleans and the rest of Louisiana, which was this vast territory on the western side of the Mississippi River, all the way to the Rocky Mountains, back to France, which had originally had it. And France, under Napoleon, was much, much stronger than Spain and might be able to actually break off those western territories from the Union. So Jefferson sends James Monroe to Paris to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans. Instead, for various reasons that have to do with what was going on in Haiti at the time, Napoleon unloads the entire Louisiana territory, for like $15 million, just a really awesome deal. And Jefferson is hoping that this finally quiets these movements for separation in the West. But instead, what it does, as many efforts to hold the Union together, to unite it more closely, have done throughout American history, is it actually raises a separate problem in the Northeast, in New England, where they totally opposed the Louisiana Purchase. Again, like, we think of this as this great, shining moment of national triumph, but it was massively controversial, and New England actually wanted to secede from the Union in protest of the Louisiana Purchase, because they realized that their power would be totally diluted if this vast, western domain, which would be settled by slave owners, under Jefferson's regime, entered the Union. They realized that New England would totally lose all power that it had once had. And so they actually supported secession in 1803, 1804, right after the Louisiana Purchase. And this goes off in lots of different directions. For one thing, it's eventually what leads to the Hamilton-Burr duel, because Burr is found to be, or suspected of being, in cahoots with these northern separatists, and Hamilton accuses him of that. Burr challenges him back, and they end up fighting the duel. Hamilton dies, of course, and Burr flees, and what he does is he starts another independence movement. Now he's trying to basically make the Louisiana Purchase an independent nation. And invade and conquer New Orleans from the United States, convince these Westerners in Kentucky and Ohio and stuff to declare independence and form this vast Western empire from the Appalachian Mountains to the Rockies, and then eventually he would take over Mexico as well, and form this massive empire. It's kind of a very little-known story in American history. But that was also, fallout from the Louisiana Purchase. And then finally, the other thing I want to mention about that is that Jefferson himself wasn't totally sure that the land purchased from France would become part of the United States. Somebody wrote to him and said, this will make the country too big; it won't be able to hold together. And Jefferson effectively writes back saying, that's fine. It doesn't need to be part of the United States as long as it's settled by our sons. Which is to say, by white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men, Americans. It doesn't need to be part of the United States. And he was fine with that. Jefferson didn't really, insist on keeping the country together in that way, or in keeping the continent under one government, which is very interesting because, as I said, that's what his kind of political enemies in New England also, favored secession at the same time. So this moment, which everybody thinks is this moment of national consolidation, the Louisiana Purchase, the country's, doubles in size, was actually a moment where everybody had their doubts about whether the country was united or should be united, or it would be better, to break it up into smaller pieces that would be more manageable, and possibly even more democratic.
This is maybe an existential question that maybe you get to later. I don't know how to say this. I'm trying to say this right.
I'm all for an existential as a philosophy major.
What's that?
As a former philosophy major, I'm all for existential questions.
Okay, cool. What do you think is a more powerful force? A shared ideal or a shared threat?
Definitely threat. definitely threat. I would say it's the
So
only
you don't think
powerful force.
higher, Michelle Obama-esque ideas? You don't think?
No. I think that's maybe
so?
a useful fiction,
Mm.
but not even that useful because what ideals? Liberty, equality, like these are things that divide us as much as they unite us because we all have different ideas about what that means. There's no two ideas you can have about is a Native American going to slit your throat, or is the Soviet Union going to start a nuclear war? I mean, these external threats, if you're able to build them up in a convincing way, are really, I mean, in my opinion, the only thing that has held the country together from the beginning, even before it was a country. It was the only thing that drove the colonists to cooperate with one another when they really otherwise didn't want to at all.
Right.
Even though they shared ideals about self-government, and liberty and whatnot, even before the revolution. So I would say definitely the threat, which is perhaps a cynical view, but I feel like it's the truth. I mean, you look at the Obama era.
Don't people call that Hobbesian or something?
Yeah, maybe.
I only know this from the Calvin and the Hobbes.
I mean, I don't know, because Hobbes is talking about like any political society at all. Whereas I'm more talking about these very large sort of configurations of multiple states that I think are really hard to hold together with any kind of united ideal. And I suspect, and many people have thought this, that in smaller, polities or communities, you could have more of an ideals-based, community rather than a fear-based one. But I think when you've got such a large one to coordinate, I think fear, especially fear of the unknown, plays a major role in holding the country together.
Wow. Well, that's very upsetting given what's happening right now, I have to tell you.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not. I mentioned in I think a different interview, just like it's not that I'm not surprised by what has happened since I started working on the book in 2014 or 2015, but I'm really not as surprised, I think, as most people, because it became clear to me.
You've picked a timeless topic in American history for sure.
Yeah, but
like it's never like the thing you pick to talk about. It's never going to be like, well, that doesn't matter anymore.
It's not. But if this book came out in like 2007 or something, or even 2015, I think, before Trump, I'm not sure it feels as relevant. Honestly, I think
that's true. No, that's
like
true.
This season is probably, if I was going to publish a book on this in the last 150
years, you knocked it
years,
right out of the park with the time.
It's too perfect. I mean, it feels like kind of a live action epilogue, to the book that I wrote or finished last year.
It's insane. I was at the grocery store today and I saw in the National Enquirer or whatever tabloid I was at the checkout with, it said Civil War.
I got to check that out.
Thanks for the help.
Yeah, but I mean, my line about that is I wonder if the Civil War comes by forcing ourselves to stay together rather than by allowing ourselves, hopefully peacefully to come apart.
Oh no, it's weird because like my friend Jonathan's been on the podcast many times, and we talked about this during college when we lived together. It's like I don't want to live in their country, and they don't want to live in mine. Like, why are we trying to hold this together at a certain point? It's like
isn't that weird though? Given that you live in Indiana, I mean, what is that?
But like we've always lived in kind of blue areas of Indiana, if you understand what I'm saying. Like I grew up in Mitchell, Indiana, which is about 3,000 people, and you can, I'm sure you understand what that was like, if you can imagine. And then I went to Indiana University for college, and me and my friend Jonathan lived together. We were both from Mitchell. And it was it's a blue, one of those blue dots. It's a college town. It's whatever. And then now I live in a suburb of Indianapolis that in past elections and often goes for, not so much this time maybe, but Democrats. So Indiana went for Obama in 2008. Let's not forget.
Yeah, but I guess I mean that if the country broke down into like 8 to 12
I'd definitely
regions, you'd be kind of in a tough
I'd
spot.
find enemy lines, as it were. Sure. But I was born under enemy lines, so I'm here. It was boring when I lived in California. Everybody agreed with me. It was like newspaper columns and be like, yeah, so what? But Indiana, it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's a little more fun to be, like I'm used to being the only person that wears a mask in the meeting, as I alluded to earlier.
So does the idea of disunion and finding yourself literally behind enemy lines or something, does that intrigue you, or does that totally turn you off because your life becomes difficult?
You would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, at how many Confederate flags are out there in Indiana, which was never part of the Confederacy, and had Union soldiers die in battle. And there was a Confederate monument in Indianapolis, which only a year or two ago was taken down because there was a prisoner of war camp here, and it was, some connection, whatever, of the ones that died at the camp or something. But they took it down. It was in a graveyard. But yeah, it's like, it's very strange. It's like a mentality. People, yeah, I think people would totally separate. The problem is that the coasts make all the money. People get a lot of grants. A lot of these places are, especially in the South and some of the less populated areas are not doing too good financially.
Right.
And California is the 8th largest economy in the world by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think is generating the tax revenue?
No, of course. I mean, that's why it was so comical in the spring, or darkly comical, when McConnell was talking about blue state bailouts of these, coastal states that wanted financial help to deal with COVID, and he was saying no blue state bailouts, when it's like all the money's going in the other direction for
Absolutely, for sure. Absolutely. You look at the charts of who's accepting government help, it's 100%, like top 20 it's all red states pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you were mentioning about Indiana and the Confederacy, because there's actually a story later in the book during the Civil War chapter about support for the Confederacy in the North, especially in the Midwest, in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois,
okay.
Because the southern counties in those states were actually quite pro-Confederate, and many actually wanted to secede from those states and from the Union and form a new Confederate state called Jackson. And there's an attempted uprising, actually.
What a terrible name.
Yeah. Well, there's a
terrible guy. What a terrible name.
There was this idea of forming a separate Northwestern Republic, they called it at the time, which would have been allied with the Confederacy, and it would have, again, it has to do with the Mississippi. It would have allowed, farmers on the Ohio River to get their goods.
It's always the rivers. It's always the rivers.
Yeah.
Even in California, it was always the rivers. That was part of their gripe. They were always stealing our water.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going dry. We have enough rainfall sometimes, and when we do, they suck it dry. In Southern California. That was still.
There's some arguments for like redrawing political boundaries according to watersheds, basically, like bioregionalism, which is kind of the guiding force behind the idea of Cascadia. Which would be an independent republic in the Pacific Northwest. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I was talking to somebody recently about this map that shows like all the indigenous nations that were in North America before the arrival of Europeans, and it's basically a map of watersheds. Everybody kind of had their own little republic in each river valley. And it kind of feels like that's kind of like what the land wants. And, when we try to resist it with these like clean lines over mountain chains and stuff, that's, where a lot of the problems and the separatist movements have arisen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Absolutely. Okay, but let's talk about the Civil War. Because I was always obsessed with the Civil War. My dad mostly took us to Civil War battlefields a lot when I was a kid. So I've been to Gettysburg. I've been to a lot of these more famous ones. There's some in Indiana, but not some of the big ones. But this like what's the name for the kind view of the South? Like the
Lost Cause.
Yeah, there you go. Lost Cause. It's very strong in Indiana too, and that was always a head scratcher for me, because it's like you were saying, like they flirted with these becoming part of the South because the river proximities, and I get that for transportation reasons, I suppose, but it's such a wannabe thing. It's like, ew, we're gonna maybe do it, and it's like my people historically. From my family are from Canada, so I have more. I guess maybe that's where my mentality comes from. Like maybe that's why I'm such an anomaly, is because my parents are both from Michigan, and my dad's family before that was from Canada back to England. So it's like I think I have a more maybe that's where my, I've never thought about that before, but maybe that's part of where
Yes.
my
Yeah.
political view comes from, honestly, because like I've always felt like an outlier because I didn't. Most of the people I grew up with in rural southern Indiana were their parents had lived there, their grandparents, yeah, the people streets were named after them, all that. Like, so yeah, maybe there was a strong pro-Confederate thing. I mean, it would explain a lot, but it's so like, I mean, there's Confederate monuments, or at least there was until recently, in Montana. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So it's like it's an idea more than necessarily a location.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, yeah. I mean, I should talk about this later in the book, where I think this really happens around like the civil rights movement, where this idea of like neo-Confederate ideology or resistance to the federal government and to efforts at integration and equality and civil rights is kind of nationalized and effectively becomes this kind of statement of modern conservatism, where even if you have no familial link to the Confederacy, you still kind of regret that it lost and effectively that white supremacy either lost or had come under challenge then and was coming under challenge again now, which is why we're facing it, once again. I mean, as for the
right.
Civil War entirely, I think that there's so many people. I also got very obsessed with the Civil War right before starting this book, and that kind of is what
Hmm.
triggered it for me. Is like, why are we so obsessed with this thing? What like it just seems like we all have, as a country, this kind of like
Mm.
subconscious obsession with it, which is not only a desire to avoid it, but we all kind of wish, I think, that we experienced it. We all kind of wonder what would have
Right? It's like,
happened.
what would I have done? Where would I
Yeah,
have been? I hope I would have not, done the wrong thing. Although
yeah.
there's a story of Cooter Brown. Have you ever heard this legend? Maybe it's a local Indiana legend or something, but like he lived on either the Indiana or Kentucky side of the border, and he had friends on both sides, so he just got incredibly blindingly drunk for the entire war
Hmm.
and just didn't serve or do anything useful, and then he just like stopped drinking after the war. But it's like the expression is I was drunker than Cooter Brown. But it's like a legend. It's like he has friends on both sides, Union, Confederate, and he just like, I
Mhm.
don't want to choose, and it's just like I'm gonna check out.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe
But the
that
rest
maybe
of
that
us, I feel like, are trying to check in, to the
right,
Civil War. We
right.
kind of wish we could experience it. Like that's what I say at some point in the book. I think
Yeah.
maybe in the conclusion, that disunion is something that we both fear, of course, and but also something that we seem to desire a little
Mm.
bit, for some reason, some kind of deep-seated psychological reason.
Oh, absolutely.
I think the Civil War is this like massive trauma that we really still haven't dealt with as a country, and that's why it is the kind
Yeah.
of secret sauce behind so many of our public disputes about Confederate monuments, about reparations,
Yeah.
and generally this kind of almost neurotic relationship that we have with the question of national unity.
Mm. Oh man. Yeah. No, it's like it's crazy. On my way to work, I see Trump flags, and then they're always, not always, very often with Confederate flags, but also
Yeah.
with American flags.
Hmm.
And it's
Well,
like,
actually, I wrote a piece about this for the New Republic
oh,
over the summer, arguing that people think it's a contradiction that there's this guy photographed at one of the kind of, I don't know if it was anti-Black Lives Matter rally or a lockdown rally or something, but he was wearing a shirt that said "America, love it or leave it," and he was waving a Confederate flag. And everyone was dunking on this guy because it seemed so patently
uh,
contradictory. But I was saying it really wasn't, because
uh,
after the Civil War, the way that things got tied up in Reconstruction, what the U.S. flag came to mean was effectively what the Confederates had wanted their flag to mean, which is white supremacy.
mhm,
Um, and that kind of is the real hidden truth of American history, which is that the Confederate nostalgia is not at all incompatible with American patriotism. They're almost the exact same thing,
mm,
according to their vision of what the country was, and
gosh,
should be.
such
And
a
if we,
warped view, such a
yeah,
warped view.
but then, and if we want that to change, it's kind of up to us to change the meaning of the U.S. flag and effectively of the U.S. Um,
Yeah, why do they get to be patriotic? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, why do you own that? Why do you own religion? Why do you own, you don't care. Not really. Like, it's just kind of like it's a gang or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well,
It's gang mentality.
that's kind of one of the sub themes running through the book. Really, is how patriotism very quickly can turn into secessionism, and vice versa, depending on your fortunes in politics. So
Like, what
like
does
Rick,
that word mean to you,
like
basically, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like like Rick Perry in 2009 was talking about secessionism when he was governor of Texas. We love this union. We'd hate to give it up, but if the American,
To be fair, I think that's a requirement to be governor of Texas.
right.
I think they all do.
Yeah, but they haven't been saying that under Trump.
Sure.
The Texas
No, yeah,
movement was
exactly.
huge
It's like,
under Obama.
we secede. We already won.
It just disappeared overnight the moment Trump was elected. And
Right.
same with California. Under Obama, California was totally in favor of strong federal power, and now they're like states' rights nullification is.
Yeah, 10th Amendment.
Yeah, 10th Amendment, exactly. Like if you said the words 10th Amendment in 2014, you were a total kook. But now it's like this totally legitimate thing for like Lawrence Tribe and established law professors and stuff to be talking about on Twitter.
Oh, absolutely.
So it just suggests to me that there's this kind of, as I keep saying, this kind of essential fragility to the whole thing, and if each side keeps getting more pronounced in its threats to secede or to subvert federal power with every election, I mean something's going to blow, and that's how it happened the first time. So I just think after this election, either side is probably going to talk quite loudly about stuff like this, about secession. It's just going to get more, louder and louder until we figure out whether we want to be a country or not.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of guns.
There's a lot of guns. Yeah, I know. That's what I mean. Like maybe
there's a lot of guns in Indiana. Like even people that think like you and I would think in Indiana, they have guns.
Yeah,
like, I don't have guns personally, but
yeah,
other people do that I know.
Yeah,
that aren't like people that you know what I mean. Like they aren't stereotypical people. That's like like they're cool, but they're like, yeah, I'm gonna get a gun because they're worried about this. It's like it's almost more incentive if you're of a more liberal persuasion.
Yeah.
To get a gun at this point. Like I've literally had conversations with my friends. It's like, it's more to, haha, zombie apocalypse away or whatever. But it's always like, yeah, I'm thinking of getting a gun. It's like, yeah, I get it. Like, I don't know. I'm not there yet, but I understand. Like,
I get that too. I want to avoid that completely, obviously, but
absolutely.
But it seemed, but it's not obvious to me that staying together as a country is the way to avoid that. As opposed to breaking up is the way to create it. That's how it happened the first time. We had a civil war to avoid breaking up as a country, but it seems to me that things have changed, and it might be that we need to break up in order to avoid having a civil war. That a peaceful dissolution might be a best case scenario for what's coming down the pike in the next decade or two.
Okay, but like. Maybe okay. Let's talk the other angle. We've talked dissolution a lot. Let's talk union. What could happen to make it more equitable, more fair? I think D.C. Puerto Rican statehood is a no-brainer. Any right-thinking person does, I'm sure, unless you're totally craven partisan. It's like the only reason to disenfranchise 4 million people is because you don't want them to have representation.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got ideas like that too, but that itself is part of our our partisanship, and there's not going to be a moment where Republicans just are like, oh, okay. So there's certainly a long list of things that can happen that if they did happen would perhaps ease our political crisis.
You just don't think that's the way the wind's blowing?
I don't think so. I just don't think they're going to happen because of our political crisis. But anyway, that aside, I think one thing would be like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission about racism and white supremacy in American history. Would be a major one, and I think reparations would be a part of that conversation. It's just we have these traumas that have been unprocessed and not worked through. And in countries like South Africa, it's only by working through them in a public way, in a televised way, that you're able to move on. But as I say, I think that would be massively divisive, highly controversial, unwanted in many parts of the country. And it's possible that it would lead to the very kind of, breakup or fragmentation that it's trying to avoid. But I think it's still a risk worth taking. The second thing I would say would be the Green New Deal, I think, has great potential to bring the country together, as the first one did. The first one, we rely on the infrastructure that it created to this very day. And that's infrastructure
so taken for granted.
Yeah, totally, yeah. And that's infrastructure that actually physically holds the country together, that connects the states.
Like highways.
Highways, bridges, tunnels, yeah, all of it. All kinds of things. Dams, flood control measures, tons of stuff.
I always thought a winning issue for the Democrats. Democrats, are you listening? You should listen to this.
Chuck Schumer, a listener?
Yeah, listen right now. WPA 2.0. Right now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Right now.
CCC.
Yesterday, 3 months ago. Come on.
Well, that's all in the Green New Deal. That's what that's about.
But it's not even I'm not talking boondoggles. I'm talking real things, infrastructure.
Yeah. Well,
Get it done.
That's what the Green New Deal is. It's not boondoggles. It's not like, digging a hole and filling it in. It's transitioning the country to green energy in a way that is necessary for not only national survival, but human survival,
Okay. Everyone overestimates how much World War II pulled us out of depression, I think.
Yeah.
Personally.
No, I agree.
It's a fairy tale that gets told, every time American history gets told, where I was growing up anyway, it was always like, well, everything was terrible for 15 years, but then we started the war started, and everything was great after that. The 50s, bendy guitar notes, and then but it's like, what, WPA? That's why I hate to keep going back to the state park I went to today, but that was built by the CCC or whatever, the WPA. That was New Deal. Deal. That's what made the Army Corps of Engineers. Hello, how do you think the Army Corps of Engineers gets to rural northern Indiana? Otherwise, never. No.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Nope. Yeah. Sorry. That doesn't happen without a giant disaster that they need to employ a bunch of people like right now. And we're in that situation again. And COVID set off so many things that, like we talked about with your wife and teachers and everywhere. It's like highlighted things we already knew to be true. Our infrastructure is crumbling. People are out of work. Put two and two together, people. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Plus the environmentally necessary aspect of it. It's a no-brainer.
Absolutely, 100%.
So that's the other thing that I would say I think could actually bring the country together, especially I think once people actually realized, how good it was. I think it's easy to caricature when it's not actually happening, but once it started, it actually put people to work in, who used to work in the mills and all that stuff, people who fell for Trump's, shenanigans.
Absolutely.
And then the third plank of my Save the Country platform is about constitutional reform, which we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
The Senate, the Electoral College,
yes.
Expand the House of Representatives,
yes.
Pass the campaign finance amendment to the Constitution, rescue democracy. Yeah, so those are my three things.
Absolutely.
And
you have my vote. What are you running for?
Yeah. But I just think that the system is just too broken at this point. That we're to give us that stuff, or that we'll be able to enact them. Especially, I just don't think Biden is the leader that we need at this moment, to say the very least.
Do you think he'll lose?
Do I what?
Do you think he's gonna lose?
I have no idea. Honestly, I think in a free and fair election, I think there's no way he loses. But as for whether it's going to be
a free and fair election,
a couple weeks ago, I thought it would be like 50-50 chance that it'd be a free and fair election. But I think it's much worse than that at this point.
Not.
So, especially with this court vacancy. So, yes, I really don't know. I'm massively worried. You won't get a hopeful note out of me. I'm sorry. It's hard to find.
I'm drilling as hard as I can here.
Yeah.
All right, fine.
I mean,
You win.
it does seem like young people are, right-minded in certain ways.
I always ask this before we go. My last question: what music have you been listening to lately?
Wow, what a great question. I've actually been getting really into krautrock.
Hmm.
Um, German stuff from the early '70s, like up to Kraftwerk.
Hmm.
But even that stuff's a little more like techno than I'm into. There's this guy named Michael Rother, who's a guitarist who was he was in a band called New,
Hmm.
Neu. Um, and yeah, it's just this like instrumental stuff, which is just very hopeful if that's what you're looking for. That's where I'm finding my hope these days is in '70s krautrock. Um, so that's one, and then two. I have pretty strange music tastes. But the other one, the one that kind of got me through writing the book actually, is Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. You know him at all? From
Mm-mm.
the '80s. He's
Mm-mm.
this he's a Pakistani singer. He's dead now for like 20 years.
Mm.
There's this form of music called Qawwali, which is Sufi devotional music.
Mm.
I actually haven't talked about this yet, like on an interview or something. But anyway, and I heard something on the radio, and I just got into this genre, and it's absolutely mind blowing. And this guy was actually really big. He played Central Park.
Mm.
He was friends with Peter Gabriel, who I think produced some stuff for him. And it's just
What, say
fantastic.
say his name again.
Yeah, Nusrat, Nusrat is his first name,
Mm-hmm.
and then Fateh Ali Khan.
Okay.
And it's funny because I was visiting Montreal where I went to school, and I went into a grocery store and they were playing Nusrat, and it's like pretty obscure stuff. It was a
Mm.
Pakistani grocery store, so I started talking to the guy, and he was telling me that Nusrat's nephew, Rahat Fateh Ali Khan, Rahat, was about to tour North America. Um, and and was coming to Atlantic City. I grew up in New Jersey, but I've actually never been to Atlantic City. So I got permission from the missus, and I decided to go to this concert. About a year ago, it was at one of the old Trump casinos in Atlantic City. Now the Hard.
Wow.
And I went. I stayed in this hostel, and I was literally the only white person in the entire audience. So thousands of people, but it was absolutely incredible. It was like the greatest concert I've ever been to.
Wow.
He took these old like Nusrat songs with his uncle, which are kind of traditional sounding, and he just made them absolutely bang. And it was like so much fun.
Mm.
So yeah, I would recommend you and anybody listening check out Nusrat. Um, and just generally Qawwali, which is just a beautiful, beautiful music.
I asked you to spell it because when I typed the name partially into Google, it brought me to the Wikipedia page for Al Nusra Front. So I'm gonna have to
Oh yeah, the different.
pull that just to pull that later.
It's Nusra with a T at the end. But he's, so yeah, it's Muslim, it's Sufi, but
Cool.
these guys are, loathed by Islamic fundamentalists because they
Really?
show all the beauty and sensuality of Islamic life and all that stuff. Yeah, great stuff.
I'm very ignorant of music from that part of the world. Really, the only music from that area of the world, I just looked it up, was Dollar Mindy. You should
Who?
look Daler, his first name or well, Mehndi. So Dalερμehndi. You should look up his music videos specifically.
I will.
You and everyone else listening.
Cool.
You'll never be the same again. It's the time before and the time after is what you'll divide your life into.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Maybe I'm overselling it, but it blew my mind anyway.
Cool.
But cool. Well, I'm gonna finish your book. It's very interesting.
Awesome.
I'm really enjoying it so far. You picked a great topic. You picked a very relevant topic, evergreen. Um, I hope for everyone's sake you're wrong
Yeah,
about
no, me too.
how
Me
you
too.
feel about how it's all going to turn out. Because I feel like, maybe I would say that because I do live behind enemy lines, but I
Yeah.
feel like we're better together.
I know. I mean, as a father, as a citizen, I also very much hope that I'm wrong. And
I,
also, I mean, the main thing, and you'll see it in the conclusion, is that I hope that knowing this history and knowing the real threat of breaking up which I think is actually closer than people even now realize. I hope that it kind of calls everyone to their senses, and everyone can, look at what the union means to them, and whether they think it's worth holding together, and if so, what needs to change in order to make that happen. And it's, I think the things that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, for sure. Well, thank you for taking so much time to talk to me.
No, thank you. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, no problem. You're welcome back anytime. I'm sure your topic will remain ever relevant. And I hope you have a good rest of your night. And I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks a lot, Rob. Good talking to you.
You too. Bye-bye. Join the Rob Burgess Show mailing list. Go to tinyletter.com/The Rob Burgess Show and type in your email address. Then respond to the automatic message. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review everywhere the podcast is available, including iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, RSS, and now Spotify. The official website for the podcast is www.therobburgessshow.com. You can find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. If you have something to say, record a voice memo on your smartphone and send it to therobburgessshow@gmail.com. Include voice memo in the subject line of the email. Also, if you want to call or text the show for any reason, the number is 317-674-3547. Until next time.